Whiplash
Whip.
2014 with director
I-
Damian Chazelle, starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. A promising young drummer enrolls at a cutthroat music conservatory where his dreams of greatness are mentored by an instructor who will stop at nothing to realize a student's potential. This is Black Eyes on White Movies. I'm Aaron Covington. This is Bernard Harris. We're talking
Yo,
Whiplash.
yes, we are. Whiplash.
B, Whiplash, man.
Yeah, Whiplash. I don't,
What what an intense experience. What an intense
so
experience.
intense. I think I've mentioned this before, but I thought about this while watching this movie. Like, I don't, man, intense food, film, and TV it's not for me. I'm too anxious. Like, I tried to watch The Bear once. I got less than 5 minutes in. That first scene's just so intense, and I felt like
That's an intense
this
show.
this movie was just that level of intensity.
Like, yeah, for most of the movie.
For like yeah, for like the
Very few
majority of the
breaks.
movie.
So this movie is interesting, and we texted briefly. We didn't want to get too deep into text about what this movie is or
Yeah.
does, but this movie is basically like we just did Karate Kid. We were talking about this, and this movie is like the opposite of the Karate Kid.
It is the anti-Karate Kid.
It is an anti-Karate Kid in a lot of ways. And I also said, and look, I don't hate the movie, and I respect Damien Chazelle
Yeah.
um, as a director. I don't love any of his movies. I don't dislike him. I think they're good. I think he's a
Yeah.
good director. I think he's a really talented, like, visual director too.
Yeah.
And obviously with music, my man loves jazz,
Loves jazz.
loves it.
Guy loves jazz.
I don't know if a director has loved jazz.
This much since the actual jazz age, if possible.
Yeah, since actual jazz directors.
Yeah.
But this movie, I think I said it was a feature-length short film.
Yeah, you did.
And he made a short film. That's how he got the movie made, which is not something I want filmmakers to understand. The short film to that short film becoming a feature pipeline is not a reliable pipeline. Don't
Mm.
tell me you got your short film and you want to make the feature version. That so rarely happens. So rarely happens, especially for a debut. This was not his first film.
Hmm.
He had made another really small, low budget film like 4 years before. I think maybe fresh out of school or something.
Mm.
So it's just not something that happens a lot,
So wait,
actually.
was his short film also this story?
His short film was this story. His previous
Oh,
feature was a whole
right.
different story.
Something different.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he was already like in the industry, sniffing the industry, had some contacts, and they told him he was trying to get La La Land made, actually.
Mm.
And out of frustration, this is what I read. He started writing the Whiplash short, and some people encouraged him to make that into a short because they thought it could be a good movie. And he makes the movie. They help him make the movie. So there was more to that than just I wrote Whiplash and got it made. It was like he was
Hmm.
on a trajectory, and this really boosted him.
Which is interesting because I do feel like when this movie came out, it was kind of like that classic perennial Hollywood story, like, oh, whiz kid comes out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, which
um,
is and isn't true as you know is what I'm saying.
it's like his
It's
first
almost
big
like
movie.
it's like when a kid gets drafted in the
Yeah.
NFL or NBA, and they're like, "Well, where did this kid come from?" And you're like, "Duke University." We saw him. He
Right.
was like a top 10 pick. We knew he should be good, right?
Right. He might not have been number one pick, but he was still in that
Yeah.
like
It's
for
like
sure.
we shouldn't be this surprised, but um yeah, Whiplash leaves a lot on the table, I think,
Mm.
because of what it tries to do um with so much drumming. And again, the anti-Karate Kid. Karate Kid, very little karate. Whiplash, a whole lot of
So much drumming.
drumming.
More drumming than you would think is possible to put in a film.
More drumming than is needed.
Yeah, I would
Than a whole
absolutely agree
season
with that.
of TV. If this was a whole series, you'd be like, man, they got drumming a lot. for this
Right.
show about drumming.
For
Another
sure.
film that it brought brings to mind about drumming is Drumline,
Oh, interesting.
which I'll reference a few times as we go through the movie because it handled drumming in a similar way, but it was just a complete movie.
Mm,
This kind of is not, to me, a complete movie.
that's really interesting. I have another drumming film that it brought up for me, which I'll also reference as we go forward. But like,
What is the film?
so, Sound of Metal.
Oh, with
Yeah, with
Riz
Riz.
Ahmed.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
it was great. Yeah.
Kind of flew under the radar. Was it an Apple TV film?
I believe Amazon Prime. I think
Amazon
it hit
Prime.
theaters, but it was one of those ones that they do like a short theater release and then straight to
Yeah.
Prime. I feel like that was it.
Mm. Yeah, that was a good movie. Good, great performance,
Oh,
Riz.
wonderful. Yeah, amazing.
Okay, so let's go through this movie and like, what are your thoughts? I guess we kind of covered it, but just a broad overall feeling
Sure.
about the movie.
Broad overall feeling. I don't like this film. Like I
Well, you
this
seem to have
is
a problem also with jazz drumming. What is this a thing? Is this a thing?
look, look, jazz musicians and look.
Oh my God. Where is this going?
Jazz musicians are incredibly technically talented musicians. The skill level that they invest into their art is undeniable. I'm not a huge fan of the music form of jazz. Like it
Hmm.
just doesn't do it for me. And the jazz that I do enjoy is typically like stuff that's basically hip hop, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
lo-fi kind of things like
Yeah.
that. And I this movie, I've seen it once before, closer to when it originally came out. I didn't love it then, but like watching it for the second time also made me think that like it also is the jazz drumming specifically that I don't love about jazz. Like, look, the fact of the matter is, when it comes to music, I'm a simpleton, man. Like, if you throw an 808 on that thing, like I'm good. Like, you know what I mean? Like a
Mm.
big, heavy bass that I can like vibe to. I love that. But like the jazz
Okay.
was like all that, like I'm
So
just like,
so
dog, I'm
so
out, bro.
so back to the film. You didn't really like the film.
So I didn't really like the film, and I think not to get too deep into the other movie I said, Sound of Metal, but what really struck me about this film is that it's just about achievement.
Mm.
It's all about achievement. It's all about his own personal achievement, right? This desire to be the best. You know, he says at some point, you know, that's why nobody's going to remember who you are, or something like that, right? And it's all about being remembered through achievement. That's just never been a theme of pretty much any story that has ever really like connected with me. You know what I mean? And
It's a
some of
hard
the,
theme to like carry on and just base one thing on, like
yeah.
without any other aspects to the movie. Like that's it. That's it. That's why it feels like a short feature length short film.
Yeah, because it really is all about like that. Every other character in the film, and this is another way it's kind of the anti-Karate Kid, right? Every other character in the film is kind of just like a stand-in for a barrier to his own success. Whereas like in Karate Kid, like every other character, even the ones that appeared only for a short time, felt kind of like they're fully realized people.
Yeah,
You know
they
what
had
I
something
mean?
else going on.
They had something else going on. They had like a hints at like a life outside of their interaction with the main character. Um, and like just the way it even like kind of portrays his dad, like it's not necessarily taking the stance that his dad's a loser, but it's like in the main character's mind, his dad's kind of a loser, and that's kind of where the film falls down to.
Yeah,
The girlfriend is just a an obstacle, and he realizes too late that she's actually a human being, but he still is kind of like, well, time for me to double down on my greatness. I don't know. It's just like it's empty. It feels very empty for me. That's
and
where I'm coming down at.
So I enjoy the film. I can't say I like the film, but I enjoy watching it because I'm not quite fully opposite, but those intense scenes I like want to see how they play out,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I thought I think there's some really good scenes in here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, I also made this analogy that Karate Kid is a full meal,
Yeah.
a 3 course dinner, 4 or 5 courses. It's got everything. Whiplash is like a candy bar,
Mm-hmm.
just hold you over, you know, Snickers, why wait, but it's not like fully satisfying. And I think even after the movie, if you like the movie, you kind of put things together that weren't actually in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
And then when you watch it again, this is my second time watching it. First time I saw it at Sundance, and there's a festival thing. If you see a movie at a festival, it's like
The vibe.
it's better than it really is
Yeah.
in terms of like the audience reaction and stuff. Because then it comes out to the real world, and it's like everybody's like, "Oh, it's all right," but a festival, it's like, "Oh man!" But people,
Yeah.
cheered and gave it an ovation and everything. And it's like, oh man, that was cool because the way he shoots it is and edits it, it really is cool. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Like you said, the technical jazz, but the technical filmmaking is
Yeah. The
a,
technical
a,
filmmaking is great in this film.
so fun to watch. But yeah, emotionally, it just didn't have the things. And I wrote a Substack. I want to get into this. I wrote a Substack post about how to write a screenplay,
Mm.
but it was really just a short article that was to help a person think about how to get through the screenplay. Like you have to get to the finish line. We were just talking about this, but for
Yeah.
anybody listening, writing, the most important thing is to get to the finish
Mm-hmm.
of your draft. Then you go and revise, and that process repeats however long it needs to repeat, but you have to finish the draft you're on. And there are some key things that this movie doesn't have
Mm.
that I feel like that I wrote in the article that you should think about to finish your draft. Things like the relationships, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Most movies, you have to have like a buddy character,
Mm-hmm.
friend, coworker that and they don't have to be a main character, but they can be. It depends on the movie, but somebody that's like a soundboard for the main character that asks the questions that the audience is asking. And you also need either a romantic relationship or a family relationship or both, but all movies can't have both. And this one made such light work of those two things
Yeah.
that like the father relationship is non existent until the end when he has to turn on his teacher.
Yeah.
But the scenes earlier are like nothing. There's nothing there. And they got Paul Reiser. Use Paul Reiser. That's a
For
legend
sure.
in the
Yeah.
game doing nothing. And the girl character, 3 scenes. The
Yeah.
scene where they meet, where I'm like, oh, because I'd seen it before. When I saw it this time and they meet and she's like, get out of here, or whatever her response when he asked her name. And she's like, no, I'm just joking. I'm like, that was really well written. And I was like, man, what a waste of like a fun actress and like a fun line.
Yeah.
Cause then she has a scene where they have a date. And then at that date, you're like, why would these two ever go on another date?
Yeah.
I see nothing.
Right.
No, there's no sparks here. He's talking about jazz on this date. And she's like, I'm from Arizona and I'm trying to find my way. And he's like, I do jazz drumming. It's amazing. And jazz is amazing. And she's like, bro, we're in New they're like New we're like in New York. What are you talking about? And then the
Yeah.
breakup scene where she just is like, you think we wouldn't you know this would happen? He's like, yeah. She's like, you're right. We shouldn't be together. It's just like 3 lines. I'm like, what a waste. Not only of a character, but of this actress who was actually interesting. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Melissa Benoist, she was like after this movie, she was Supergirl on the
Oh,
CW show for
see?
like 6 years. Yeah. I
What a
think she
talent.
yeah, absolutely. You don't get 6 seasons off of nothing for sure.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great like role for her, and I agree with you. What an interesting character. That first scene is really well acted. Like even when she's like, "You want to take me out on a date?" Like
Yeah.
she's like, it's not a challenge, but she's like kind of calling this bullshit. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
like there's just like there's like a independence there. Independence, I don't know if that's the right word, but there's just like a something there that then you don't really get to see as much of in the later scenes. That's
Yeah.
kind of a bummer.
And I mean, there's so many like this film just needed like a bigger story, and he
Yeah.
needed a buddy to be like, "Oh, you want to be great?" Like that's almost like there needed to be somebody that was like egging him on.
You know
So
what's
like if it's the girlfriend and she's like they go on that first date and she's like, "I want to be a jazz drummer." If she were like, "Show me," or if she were like,
yeah.
"Then why are you here?" He's like, "What?" She's like, "You should be drumming. Why? What are you talking about? You want to go on dates or you want to drum?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they could be together because it's like, "Oh, I support you wanting to be a great drummer," and maybe they break up at the end, or even she comes to that last concert because they're still kind of together, or she was at the hospital with all this stuff, and then when he comes back on stage and starts snapping,
Yeah.
we cut to her in the audience and she's like, yes, you know what I mean? We need
Yeah,
somebody
sure.
else that's like rooting for him besides
Yeah.
just him and JK. And also, I got to say, he's like, Charlie Parker, Charlie Parker. And the teacher's like, I never had a Charlie Parker because Charlie Parker wouldn't go to the staff conservatory of jazz. He needed a friend to be like, you want to be a great jazz drummer, but you at school? Why are you not performing
Right.
great jazz in the world? What are you talking about? You think this guy
Right.
is the key to great jazz? Did this guy say that Charlie Parker was great, or is Charlie Parker just great? You know?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a super interesting to think about how, there's definitely a connection between I think jazz and classical music. My sibling is a instrument and brother-in-law are classical instrumentalists, and definitely there's some
Wait, wait, say that again. Your sibling
my
and
sibling
brother-in-law,
and their partner, my brother-in-law.
classical.
Yeah. A cellist and a bassist.
Yeah.
And so they perform sometimes in like in jazz and ensembles and all these things. Like there's a lot of connection to, and it's always interesting in both of those music forms is like they have these very like fancy, conservatories studying the work of a lot of people who just figured it out, and that's why they are
Yeah.
remembered as greats. You know what I mean?
Right. And
But
like the drumline conceit was like he don't even read music. He can't even read music.
mm,
He just hears and can mimic, and one of his obstacles was he had to learn to read music. And the
mm,
kid in this movie had no obstacles, also, no personal obstacles to
all
overcome.
self-created,
Exactly.
with the
And
exception of JK, maybe.
JK was and JK was an interesting, and we're gonna get to the more cultural discussion about this kind of like domineering
Yeah.
presence, this toxic masculinity and all these kind of things. And you have to wonder like, what was he really doing?
Yeah. Before we
Because
get it,
did he go ahead?
I was just gonna say before we jump into that, I really want to touch back on that thing you said about a buddy or somebody to be the audience's voice, right? And I think about that because you know, uh, there's a type of plot structure called four corner opposition, um, and that is typically the protagonist and the antagonist, and then two other characters that kind of like one's kind of good but sort of villainous, and one's kind of bad but sort of heroic, right? And um, Whiplash is an example of four corner opposition. There's the main character, Miles Teller. I can't remember his character name. There's Miles Teller,
Also, not a great sign for
for sure. J.K. maybe
Andrew
Fletcher was his.
Nyman,
Oh,
Neiman.
and Andrew Neiman, yeah. So there's Andrew, there's Fletcher, which is JK's character. There's the father, and there's the girlfriend, right? That's the four corner opposition in this movie.
Okay.
Another movie that really hits the four corner opposition structure pretty hard is actually Batman Begins. There's
Mm.
Batman, there's Ra's al Ghul, then there's like the good version of Ra's al Ghul, and then there's the Scarecrow. And anyways, the point being is they
Yeah.
both they both really hit this four corner opposition structure. But what I find interesting about the two of them is that Batman Begins is a great example where there's four corner opposition, but then there's Alfred.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Alfred's the
Alfred
buddy.
is there to be like, this is crazy. Why are you doing this? Why would you have, you know what I mean? He's the
Yeah.
audience's voice.
But
And
also to be
so
like, well, if you're gonna do it,
you got to do
do it
it
like
this
this.
way. Or you know what I mean? And
Or he was
so
like, you did all those push-ups and you can't get up? What the you
right,
know? Like encouraging
exactly.
him at the same time.
While at the same time being the audience voice, right? Like, because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, you're this strong, you're having trouble. So anyways, the point being that you brought up that buddy piece, I think is really important. And even though they're two very odd movies to compare, they do have the same sort of plot opposition structure, except one has the buddy and one doesn't.
Interesting. Yeah. I think even this movie, it could have been they either needed to be a more of a real world going on, or it could have been all the band. It could have been all
Yeah.
in the band, and we could have seen because he's not the only one that wants it to be great in a band
Yeah.
like that. I need to see a saxophonist whose mouth is all splintered up from the woodwind from the reeds,
Yeah.
or a trombonist who's like, oh, man, I've been practicing so much, my shoulder, I can't even get my, you know what I mean? And of course,
Yeah, for
other
sure.
members of the band are just like, I just want to be in this band and be great. But there's a couple others that want to be all time greats. And if he was dating like a violinist
Yeah.
and she saw this happen, and then she found out that he was performing and came to the show and gave him that yes when he did this thing, even just making it a full band movie,
Yeah.
just a couple scenes with the father would have like fleshed it out because nobody in the band except for the other two drummers, and really they alternated. The older drummer was more important the first half of the movie, and then the younger drummer was more
Yeah.
important. The redhead drummer was more important in the second half. So it's like even his direct opposition isn't even consistent enough for me to like follow.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is about just this individual achievement. I don't know if you're ready to, but I think that makes me think about the
Well,
cultural
well,
components.
even like the drumming scenes, and like we're kind of like raging hard against this movie, and of course we said it was really well done, but it's
It's
all
super
fair
well done, and it's like, and it
criticism.
won an
But
Oscar, so I think, or something like that.
the thing about the drumming scenes, yeah, J.K. Simmons won an Oscar, right?
Right? Yeah, it's good. It can stand up to this.
And like the thing about the drumming scenes is they're repetitive. It's like the same thing.
Yes, it is.
He throws something at him like two or three times. Okay, it's like okay, he's gonna throw something at him. You kind of blew your wad when he threw something at him the first time. It's like
Hmm.
you got to lead up to that. Then he smacked
Right.
him. Like he did the worst treatment to him early, and you could already see what was happening. So we kind of didn't need more that much more drumming later if the first one was going to be that intense. The first one almost should have been, he goes, Neiman, you take over, and he's like kind of nice to him, right? It's like you got it, man, you got it, and not my tempo. He does that.
Yeah.
Not my tempo. He should have just done that like three times and been like, Neiman, why don't you go back? Just switch them
Hmm.
instead of having us live through like he throws something at him, he smacks him. Do you know what fast tempo is? Or when
Yeah.
I like, because then we saw the whole movie right there. That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the next time, it's the same thing. And then the next time, he brings in the redhead guy, and then they're all battling together.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. And then some Neiman is kind of getting it, and he gets in his face, and he throws something at him, and he's banging the thing to throw him off tempo, and he finally gets it. But like that's the same beat from
Yeah.
the first time. It doesn't change until the end but even then he leaves and comes back, and that's even kind of the same thing because he's like defiant. But after like 3 minutes, JK is like, he's doing it. He's doing it. And now he's doing like the same antagonism, but for the kid. He's like getting in his
Yeah.
face, like, keep going. And then he like fixes the symbol and stuff. But the beat just repeated. The whole
Yeah.
scene repeated like three or four times. And that like, while I watch this movie, I just want to watch the end scene. That's all I need.
Yeah.
You know,
It does encapsulate literally everything about the film.
you know, I don't need the girl friend because they made her into because they didn't need her. I don't need to watch her. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
Okay, okay, that's enough. That's enough.
That's fair.
It it's a
They're brought
candy movie.
together at the end by the groove of jazz.
I think it would have been so dope to rewrite this movie, right? If she was like the young guy in the band, and he's like, "Oh, how long you been in the band?" She's a violinist. That's just, I think, cool. Also,
Yeah.
she's like 3 years. He's like, "How long did it take you to get to the?" She's like, 3 years. He's like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool. That's cool." You know, it's like, well, this is my first year. She's like, "I know." You know, she's like, "I know."
Yeah.
He sees her practicing. You know, he goes and he's practicing. She's leaving. She sees him practicing. She brings him like some water or something, or he brings her a snack or something. They hit it off, you know.
Yeah. I think it
Then
could have.
when he forgets, when he sets the guy's drumsticks down, then it would go through the band that he did that on purpose.
Mhm.
She would break up with him, be like,
Mm.
you know, I understand it's a cutthroat, but you can't sabotage somebody else. He's like, I didn't. I just set him down. And she's like, no, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
When they battling and it comes out that he didn't take him. Simmons took him because he's always always messing with people.
Right.
They get back together. Then when he attacks him and messes up the show, she's like, I'm in the band. I can't.
Right.
I don't know. But when he drops out of school, maybe she comes around and they're like, or maybe not. But then at the last concert, she's there.
Right.
And when he's going off and Simmons is like, he's got it. We see her in the audience. She's like, he's doing it. Somebody like,
Oh,
shut up. I'm watching the show. You know what I mean? But now we're seeing it through her eyes too. We're with her. She's us. And we're like
yeah. Since
almost more invested. And he had like a romance. And like these guys, these great musicians, have a tons of romances and dozens of divorces. These guys aren't like
always within the
agnostic
band.
about sex,
Always within the band.
and always within the band, always with somebody else famous. Like, check
Yeah.
any like legendary artist, and they've had like a string of whirlwind romances. You know what I mean?
Hey man, since we're rewriting this, I want to come in and change that last scene a little bit. All right. So yeah, last scene concert, but she's in the band, right? So she's there
She's
too.
in the band. Yeah,
She's in the band, right?
he
So hear
brought
me out,
her
hear
to
me out.
this other band, this professional band. Yeah,
Right. So when he
I
comes
like that.
back, right, and he starts his 15-minute drum solo or whatever
15
it
minute
is.
drum solo. Yeah,
Oh my God. But like even when like Simmons is like upset and doesn't want anybody else to start, she's the first person to go on
she
tempo
starts the
with him.
song on
She starts
Caravan.
it. He has no choice. Fletcher has no choice but to go along with it, bring the rest of the band in.
Yeah, he's like, I'll cue you into the cellist, and the cellist was like, fuck that, man. I ain't no way, man. She's
Yeah.
looking over
She goes for it.
and goes, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
And Simmons is like,
We did
oh,
it.
okay, okay, gotta do it.
But yeah, no, I do
Anyway,
think it would be more interesting if there was like more of a triangle like relationship structure like
yeah,
that as opposed to what it was.
yeah, yeah.
But
It just
you
needed
know,
just
we've
anything
already said.
extra. Okay, cultural
No,
stuff.
I was just gonna
We're
say,
jumping ship.
as we've already said, it's phenomenally well filmed. It's pretty well written and it's greatly acted. So it's a well made film.
Right, right. Criticisms are what for he's
Yeah,
made a bunch of films since and huge budgets, made his money and critical and audience acclaim. So hey,
yeah. I just don't personally enjoy it. I had
valid.
to
That's
get in
very
at the
valid.
end.
That's very valid.
But cultural stuff.
Hit it.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely one of the things about the achievement piece of it that strikes me as empty, and one of the things that I think, what we do, right, on this podcast is we talk about where this kind of comes in this Anglo-American, kind of white American mainstream culture and what these stories say about the culture, right? Um, and I do think that this film is very much like in this kind of mode of this American thought process of like individualism at all cost, right?
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
nobody can. not only can nobody get in your way, but also nobody can help you get there. You've got to do it on your own. You know what I mean? And and my achievement as like
Yeah,
almost like the great man. There's a thing in history that they call the great man of history, right? Julius Caesar is like one of these great men. Napoleon, like this whole idea that like the world is like world history or anything important is strung together on like the deeds of individual great men,
right.
typically great white men. And it's like this really falls into that. Like it's all about that idea of like you're gonna
Mm,
do it on your own. Nobody can stop you or get in your way. You know what I mean?
yeah, and how those stories fall apart so quickly if you do any
Yeah.
research. You're like, oh, this general was actually super important also, and like these men that fought this elite band of soldiers, or the
Right.
work that the villagers did to sustain in a war, or I was reading this great book, Disordered Chaos,
Mm.
from this black like astrophysicist, and she was like, "Oh yeah, a lot of these great physicists, their wives or sisters were like their partners, and they got no
Yeah,
credit because they were women, but they wouldn't have done any of this work without having a partner, you know." Um,
for sure.
so
I
yeah,
was just gonna
history
say
is
like,
often boiled down to one person to its detriment. Detriment.
yeah, I was just gonna agree with that. Like, there's a lot of like the kind of great medieval king names that people maybe have heard of, like a Richard the Lionheart or whatever. Like all of those people, their queens were like the diplomats. They were like the head of the diplomats. Like that role of queen wasn't just sitting around knitting doilies. You know what I mean? It was a
Yeah,
government office, and we forget about these things. Uh, Anything happens because of a entire network of people, not just one person.
yeah. Oh, and I was gonna say, just to kind of backtrack a bit
Yeah.
about Damien Chazelle, like this movie kind of doesn't. This movie doesn't really have classic status. I
Mm.
think some people like it and remember it fondly, but I think some of the things we were talking about would have elevated it. But I think Damien, because he is still a really talented director and writer. But
Definitely.
what he's missing, he needs a run. He needs a 3 movie and 2 year run.
Mm.
Classic like 90s Spielberg, you know?
Yeah.
His movies are too far apart. La La Land's 2016, Babylon 2022. We need him to get to work. We need like just him operating at his highest level is going to produce like a good movie, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like if he can just get a run in like back
Hmm.
to back,
The
three
classic
movies in four
Spielberg.
years, even something,
Yeah.
Or I guess and he did First Man, that was 2018. So that's still like 2 years and 4 years apart. It's too many years apart.
Yeah.
He needs
First
he
Man,
needs
I've wanted to see that one, but I haven't seen it.
he needs like a run. Just like
Yeah.
these 3 years are all about Damien Chazelle.
Right.
He's up for two Oscars back to back years, and then a third movie that's just like for the fans.
Yeah, the Giselle Assance for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, I also think that yeah, the great man thing is what this movie is about. I want to be great. I want to be one of the best ever.
Hmm.
And the idea of how much a person has to suffer to get there, and Simmons talks about that a lot. And I think this is a very such a Western idea trope
Yeah.
in the sense that it's just so ubiquitous in the world that I wonder if it's just part of every culture now that but it's also going away. This was huge in the 90s, especially in 2000. Like you saw a lot of coaches were like this, like just yell at the
Yeah.
players and you got to push them hard and push them to this breaking point. Like you have to do it, not the sport, not the
Right.
activity. You as a coach have to be so intense. And that's the only way that someone can succeed.
Yeah.
And that it's funny because it comes from the greatness of other people who maybe didn't experience that. Like Michael Jordan's a great example because he's such a like the penultimate athlete and it's
Sure.
his drive, but it was his drive. You know, his coach in college, Dean Smith, was not like Bobby Knight. if you know basketball, Bobby Knight was a very fire and brimstone coach. And
Yeah.
I'm sure Dean Smith yelled at his players. I mean, coaches, but Dean Smith's general demeanor as a coach was more calm, more instructor,
Yeah.
professor than Bobby Knight's. Get in your face, cuss you out, throw a chair, embarrass you. This idea that you have to humiliate your students to get them to be great,
Yeah.
humiliate them beyond like this pale of scope of like human decency.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you know, I that I've experienced from coaches or teachers in life. It's up until a certain point. Like by the time I got out of high school, it's like if you yelled at me, we were just gonna fight, or I was gonna leave, or
Right.
you know, like there's no way going to college like have a teacher like that. He smacked
Can't
me,
imagine. Can't
bro.
imagine.
And really, in a black community, that shit just doesn't would not have flown.
Nah.
Like he's had intense, we'd have just been like, bro, what are you doing? Throwing stuff. Like, I'm out of here, man. I don't need this. Like, and that's like the calm I'm over response. Cause it could also be the like he tackled him at the end after like a whole semester of that kind of treatment. That would have
Yeah.
been day one. That would have been day
Yeah.
one. We'd have been tussling. I don't care how
Right.
many tight muscle shirts you wearing, and not just me. I'm a big dude. Guys a lot smaller than me would not have
Yeah. I don't
tolerated.
think you know, it's funny because it's like so often the question is like, how white is this movie? It's like
This makes it
that
very white.
that scene when he gets slapped and does nothing. Uh,
Just keep
of
drumming,
course,
like, oh, you're right. I gotta drum harder. You're right.
yeah. And I'm not saying that that's, obviously what all white people would do or anything like that, but it's very much a part of the culture that you're like, you get smacked down or broken down in order to get built back up into something greater than before. And like, yeah, the fact of the matter is that would not have flown. That could not have flown in any, even if it wasn't necessarily a black school or anything, but just like had that character been black, like
Yeah,
it'd have been a very
yeah,
different film.
yeah. That's even what I was looking at, because some of the other musicians were black or other minorities. It's like
Yeah,
I can't even imagine a lot of women standing, being able to be in the room with that kind of violence.
yeah, for sure.
It's like I'm out of this band, or would have stood up and just people would have just reacted out of a trauma response, if nothing else. Like,
Yeah,
what the hell? You can't treat us like that.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think much has been made about like the abusive nature of the teacher character. And, I'm willing to say that this is Hollywood, so of course it's exaggerated, right? Um, but and also like from like a literary kind of sense, a writing sort of sense, I get the attraction of like, you know, taking this teacher student relationship into some sort of kind of abusive romantic relationship sort of territory, like at least as subtext. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
But at the same time, I don't know that it fully delivers for me.
yeah. I think without even like they also needed a common villain.
Yeah.
Like these
That
jazz competitions they were going to, who were they going up against?
yeah.
He needed a teacher. Like we needed a reason why he was being so intense, an external reason we could see why he was being so intense about it. Because like Bobby Knight, for instance, well, we know he's trying to win the NCAA championship every
Yeah.
year. JK, we hear about the tournament, but even a basketball movie would have been like, oh, you got to go against Flash Johnson, the best basketball player for the coach that's won more titles than your coach, because of one year your coach got cheated, and now they're rivals because they also went to the same high school. Just build me
Yeah.
out a story.
Well, even then, again, the anti Karate Kid, right? Karate Kid had,
Yeah, give me
both.
Crease.
You had Crease and Johnny, whereas this it was just
Yeah,
the teacher and the.
just the teacher and the student.
I
And
also think that it's interesting, and I think it's a really great storytelling choice on Damien Chazelle's part to make this like a story about jazz, because it's such an insular world.
well,
Like,
he was a jazz in a jazz ensemble.
That
college.
makes so much sense.
Yeah, so
That
he's
makes so
actually
much
he
sense.
doesn't just love jazz; he is jazz.
He's
Okay.
jazz. Jazz flows through him.
Yes.
It definitely makes more sense because I feel like when the stakes are lower, you get some of the worst human behavior.
Right.
You know
It's
what I
kind of like
mean?
how people talk about academia. Oh man, what was the quote? Uh, Shoot, I can't remember, but yeah, sometimes academics can be some of the nastiest people.
Some of the most terrible people for an award that you've never heard of.
Yeah, you're like, what is this about? This tenure, man. Tenure is tough. You gotta get that tenure.
Yeah,
I would love tenure, actually. I get it. I don't even
for
teach. I don't even
sure.
teach right now. But tenure sounds amazing at the right university. So, and also, so a whiteness is the privilege to be that intense about something this small. I also found it
Yeah.
interesting. I think this is also a whiteness thing, but well, not completely, but it is a Western individual culture thing where like certain achievements mean more, right?
Mm.
Because he's with his family and his brothers plays football and he's like, oh, Division 3, but you can't tell me nobody in that family would be like, oh, being a professional drummer is actually pretty cool too. They acted like it was like
Yeah.
like this was 99 and he was playing video games. You couldn't even say that about video games now. You'd have to say it 20 years ago.
Right. If
But
that, right? 89ers.
somebody, even his dad, could have been like, oh, drummer, like like Slash, who's the guy from some other,
Oh, for sure.
like Metallica, they got a
Yeah.
drummer. You could do that. And he'd be like, well, that's a different kind of music. Well, he's a drummer though. Can you play that? He'd be like, I could, but I do jazz drumming. But it's not like we're in a world where there's no context for
Hmm.
world famous drummers, or that every concert any of those people went to had a drummer,
Yeah.
or that they've never been to these are like cultured people, like because his dad was a teacher, and like they've never been to a orchestral concert in their town and seen a drummer percussionist on stage. They
Yeah.
acted like they acted like my man was doing
Like he was
like,
playing.
I mean, it was almost a metaphor for like I said, video games or something much more mundane and like obscure than drumming, being a professional musician.
That's really interesting. And so this reminds me of something that I thought about specifically while watching the film. I also feel like this movie does the thing that I don't love that movies always do when it's like this sports movie or this music movie or whatever it is really a very camouflaged metaphor, a lightly camouflaged metaphor for what the writer thinks about writing.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and sometimes, or just more art more generally. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like that
But no,
was an
specifically about writing, that happens a lot. Yeah.
you know yeah, you get what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And so I feel like there's definitely some of that going on in this too. Like both in the sort of you got to suffer for your art and even some of that kind of to your point, like the flippancy with which he's kind of met with by different people who are like, oh, what, you drum? Yeah,
Yeah.
I play music. You've heard it before. You
You listen to it all the time, literally.
know what I mean?
It's
So
everywhere.
it definitely feels a little bit more about like a writer's take on writing sometimes while watching this movie.
Yeah.
And it's not always a take on writing that again resonates for me.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Shocking.
I guess like this movie just would have benefited from a touch of the outside world. And I
Mm,
think when we look back at like Avatar, we talked about like James Cameron, the mind
yeah.
of the white person that comes up with that and thinks, oh, this is a great metaphor for the natives,
Hmm.
and does no further research. That kind of insularity is what this whole movie is. And by this movie
Yeah.
not having somebody who's like, there's great drummers, like all-time great drummers that aren't in jazz conservatories. Just to say that to him, even for
Yeah.
him to get mad about it, shows like a narrow-mindedness that's often not allowed. Or if you're like a minority trying to make it in the field, you end up finding yourself having to contemplate so many varieties of success in that film because you can't just typically drive in one path.
Yeah.
You, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Absolutely. It's things are gonna get cut off. You gotta pivot. You gotta create something new, take a new space.
Door,
You know what I mean?
doors get slammed all the time, um, and locked. Like, oh, you can't go this way anymore. In a way that I
Right.
don't know that the average white person, ambitious person, experiences. This isn't even just in film or TV. See it in the corporate world and law, definitely in law, also in law enforcement. You know, medical fields. It's like, yeah, sometimes you have to take so many zigs and zags to get to where you want.
Yeah. And I definitely think, you said not just film and TV, but I definitely think that that is really present in storytelling in general because it's often written from this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Uh that, you could do you just have to be good enough at the final concert and your life will be you'll get the
Right.
achievement you
I
want.
was
You know
just
what I
thinking
mean?
that kind of thing. Yeah. It's like it ends with his final like bang on the drum at that concert. It's like, okay, I guess we take it to mean that he's gonna be great,
Yeah.
he's gonna achieve his goal. But yeah, that's a big assumption, really.
Yeah. And maybe, maybe that's not intended, but the fact that that's how the film ends, again, I love a slice of life film, a peek into a moment in time in someone's life. That's a great plot conceit. You know what I mean? But just wasn't enough. I think you've
I
you've
mean,
said it the
yeah, by
best.
that it could have used a little more Rocky,
Yeah. You
where he's
you
just
said it
like,
best. There's not enough outside world in it.
yeah, because like Rocky wasn't like I'm gonna be the greatest boxer ever. By the fifth movie, you're like, oh, Rocky's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he is
But
the
the first one,
greatest.
the, the end of the first one, he's just like, I got to prove to myself, I got to prove this to myself,
Right.
you
And
know?
hopefully
And
get enough payday to pay some bills.
not even,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
not even.
By the end, he's just like, I just got to go the distance with Apollo. That would mean everything to me. And
Right.
I guess we're supposed to get the sense in this movie that just impressing this teacher would mean everything, but he never says that. Rocky says it.
Yeah.
He never
And I
says that.
also think I think that's where the writing or sports metaphor, there's a lot of metaphors. Maybe it's just literally about music and not a metaphor. But I think
They're
that's
all the same metaphors.
they're right. But I think that's one of the
The
things
sports,
that
the
this
karate, the drumming, those are all
it's
MacGuffins, right?
yeah, it's exactly it's all MacGuffins. And I think that's the thing, like at no point I just didn't feel like that whole scene when like the JK's character at the end starts to feel it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
all that. Like I didn't buy it because I didn't feel like that character had done anything to earn it. You know what I mean? Like that turn didn't feel like there was enough story built around it for
yeah,
me to care. But like to your point, if you we're bringing up at Rocky, like Apollo's enough of a character with enough kind of he's an antagonist, but he's not an absolute villain. Like there's enough that it matters at the end when he says "good job." You know what I mean?
yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't really matter. This guy sucks. I don't care if he likes what I did.
yeah. I will say too, like I thought, yeah, like you said, good acting. I thought Miles actually did a good job.
Oh, for sure.
I like Miles Teller, and I thought he was. That's another talent that Damien Chazelle has. As much as we're saying this movie could have or should have, like again, it was a successful movie, and like he got good performances from both of his actors. Like
Yeah,
Miles Teller was such like a spoiled, pretentious kid, in this movie, and I
yeah.
felt like he played that to a
Very out of
T.
touch. Super out of touch.
Super out of touch. and just like, I gotta do this, like I gotta do this, and then like, no, you don't. I gotta do this. Where are my sticks? I don't know. I put them right there. It's not my fault. I don't know. It was just like really good performance. Um, but yeah, how white is this movie? It's pretty white. It's really white.
I would say so.
And it's not even that just because it's about drumming. It's just like the way it depicts it and the way it depicts this relationship. I mean, people are always trying to impress a teacher or a coach. There's something universal in that for sure. But um, the way it played out in this movie didn't hit on all those things. Didn't hit on everything.
Yeah. And
And like I said, we've talked about it ad nauseum, what we feel like is missing, but I find myself kind of continually going back to that and trying to think about fixes or what it would need. But I want to get off of that, but I got nowhere else to go,
well,
which
I
is kind
think
of a
that's
metaphor for the whole movie.
no, I think that's fair, right? Because we've already acknowledged it a couple times. It's undeniably a good film. It's well crafted. It's well shot. It's beautiful to look at. Great score, sound design, all these things. Like it's clearly a well constructed film. So it's good. For anybody who's a Whiplash fan who hasn't liked what I had to say, it's a good
Right,
film.
right.
It's just not enjoyable. You know what I mean? Like,
Not enjoyable for you. It's just like I said, it's a candy bar, it's fast food.
yeah. It,
And I had McDonald's earlier today, so you get some fast food.
and Mickey D's comes clutch. I think the other thing I'm gonna touch back on is Sound of Metal. And I had to
Yeah,
when I thought about Sound of Metal while watching this movie, and I kept like thinking back throughout watching the movie, like Sound of Metal just kept coming back to me. I ended up watching it after I finished the film. Um, what I love about Sound of Metal is what I don't like about this film, right? So this film is all about achievement, right? And just
right.
getting whatever that golden fleece is at the end. Um, Sound of Metal is about a drummer and it's all about identity, right?
Right.
Like
Hmm.
he's losing his hearing and all he's been is a drummer and he has to completely reevaluate who he is and what his life is like now.
Yeah.
And I just think that obviously I think it's a very smart decision to have an actor like Riz Ahmed, a man of color, play in that movie because it adds some extra layers onto that identity story. But like, I think that's one of the ways in which something like Sound of Metal, even though it's filled with mostly white actors and white writer, white director, I would say is kind of, at least by our criteria, a less white film, because it's not about some of these myths of America or Western civilization. It's more about like I have to deal with my life changing in a way that I didn't expect from some outside force. It's about
Sure.
identity, and there's something more connective to that about that to me.
Well, it was just a full film. There was other characters and they
Yeah,
had other wants and desires, and he wasn't trying to be the best drummer ever. He was just trying to make a living, and then he couldn't anymore doing the only thing he knew how to do. So yeah. And Drumline is about, this movie is about identity, but we just didn't
yeah,
get enough of his identity to understand
I
who
think
he
that's fair.
was. It was just such a singular thing. And I think, you know, yeah. But like I said, there's it's not white because he had a singular ambition. There's black people like that. There's
Sure.
any race, to have a singular ambition.
And I think again, it's back to that cultural thing, right? There's something about that kind of Western civ kind of
Yeah.
idea of like chasing greatness
It's also interesting that the
exclusion of anything
greatness
else.
that the greatness he's chasing is like black musicians.
For sure. For sure. Right. Charlie Parker.
I want to be as great Negro jazz saxophonist Charlie Parker.
I also thought it was weird that it
What an
wasn't a
amazing
drummer.
Negro. Yeah, why not? Why not be some great
I
drummer?
thought yeah, as a person who doesn't know much about jazz, for a long time, even though I've heard
They
of
didn't
Charlie
name some
Parker
drummers,
before.
but they kept talking about Charlie Parker the
They
most.
definitely kept talking about Charlie Parker. I was just like, oh yeah, I've heard that as a jazz great name. He must be a drummer. And then I looked up, it's like a saxophone. I was like,
Yeah.
that's
No,
interesting.
yeah. They named like Buddy Rich, who's a drummer,
Oh,
but
Buddy Rich. Yeah, they
they said
said
Charlie
Buddy Rich
Parker
for
like
sure.
3 or 4 times. So,
Yeah.
um,
Anyways,
I think I'm good.
Whiplash.
Whiplash.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's it. I got no casting for it. It would be a different movie. An absolutely different movie if we recast it.
I would just put Sam Jackson in the J.K. role just for the yelling.
Oh,
You know,
oh
I
yeah, for
told you to
sure.
put down those drumsticks or something. I don't know. Just Sam. Just get Sam in there being Sam.
Are you late or are you fat?
Yeah, because he would do the call like, not my tempo, like with a little
Yeah,
smirk on his face, or even straight face. He just got such a unique. Well, we know his face so well now.
yeah.
It would be great, and he'd be so intense at the end, just like J.K. was. But it would be fun to
Oh
see
yeah.
him. Yeah, yeah, hell yeah, motherfucker.
All right, yeah, for sure. I want to see this.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
All right, man.
Whiplash.
Whiplash.